Hello, welcome back to the show. I'm Fatal Foxtrot, and with me today is my guest.
Hi, I'm Optimistic Occultist. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. Anytime. And you may notice that there's no video on today's episode. You're probably staring at a blank screen wondering if my capture card went out or not. And no, that's because we're here today to talk about something that existed before visual media. So there's not really any video to capture for it. We're here today specifically to talk about War of the Worlds, a 1938. It was a radio play. It's a good thing we're here to talk about it. It was a radio play that broadcast by Orson Welles. It was an adaptation of a short story by H.G. Wells a few years prior. No relation. And yes, I'm here with my guest to talk about that today. And we have a few questions that we need to answer in this interview. So,
Yeah.
I guess we'll start with the most fun one. What did you know about it before researching?
Well, I have older generation relatives, and they mostly told me about the national panic that supposedly happened. There were news articles reading things like, extra, extra, read all about it. Radio show makes everybody go up in arms against alien threats.
Yeah, aliens, right? So
Yeah.
you may have guessed that from the title, War of the Worlds. It was later found that this was like highly exaggerated because the newspaper companies were trying to go for the throat of the radios back then, and like it was pretty highly exaggerated. But we're gonna go with this interview with under the assumption that it really was some mass hysteria stuff that happened. Maybe we'll talk about that part later, but let's go into... You brought it up already. What was War of the World broadcast about? Well, it was about aliens. Apparently, aliens were invading New Jersey, specifically. Why New Jersey? I don't know. Like, the Pentagon's not New Jersey. You would think that, like, if it was an alien army invading the... like Earth as a whole, they'd go after like top government like powers, right? Like they'd go after White House or like an Independence Day or whatever, right?
Right.
But this was the 30s, you know,
This is almost like something that South Park would write, like aliens going after New Jersey to try and stop Jersey Shore from happening.
Right. So apparently what you were probably wondering, why did this freak everybody out? Well, so at the time, people were, like, the radio was new, right? People, believed everything they heard on the radio at the time, according to Orson Welles himself, who was like the reason why he put this show in the first place. He's quoted as saying because he was tired of the way people swallowed up everything they heard on the radio.
Oh.
So you could say this is one of the earliest forms of a social experiment, from a media social experiment, you could say.
Oh my.
Because he did this because he wanted to cause a freak out like that, to show people not to just trust everything they heard on the radio. And that's because he had the way it was done. You know why it caused such panic? Like, what the format of the story was about?
Yeah, I know a little bit where it's kind of like there was like an orchestra kind of going on, and then they would cut it to like these emergency broadcasts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like they would have like realistic sounding music playing, like this was the pop music of the era of the 30s, right? Like this is what people would listen to on the radio. Realistic sounding, but probably not copyrighted. But then they would cut to realistic sounding emergency broadcasts with your the newscaster voice guy that you were doing. Yeah.
This just in, giant saucer lands in New Jersey.
Yeah, exactly. They would say crap like our military is falling and stuff like that. Like, yeah, and so the idea was that people were all up in arms, calling in on 911, like trying to figure out places to donate blood, trying to enlist in the army and stuff like that. Like, but The reason why this was one of the most infamous broadcasts in radio history, well, unfortunately, the answer to that question was it really wasn't. Well, here's what actually happened. Unfortunately, it turns out that the mass hysteria was not nearly as crazy as everyone says it was, and the reason why it was pushed to such hyperbole was because the newspapers were losing money to the radio, right? And they were trying to do a fear campaign to make people afraid of the radio and want to go back to reading newspapers.
Oh, so radio killed the newspaper star.
Yes, and I have a site for my You're amazing. Radio killed the newspaper star. Yeah, that's correct. That's exactly what happened, and it was basically a smear campaign, but it like ended up ridiculously backfiring though, because people were like, holy crap, the radio can scare me that much, like I want to get one of these like toys, like you know what I mean, like the sales are like okay, so I'm citing my sources now, and this I watched a video by Simon Whistler on a YouTube channel called Today I Found Out, and he explained all about this being a hit piece by the newspapers to try to get people away from radios, and then it severely backfired because the prices of advertising and stories on the radio like skyrocketed after this. So like yeah, so what? So we already talked about this a little bit, but let's formally address the question: what elements were familiar to listeners, and what caused the panic? We already talked like about this. Like the music at the time was realistic. It was what they would be expected to be listening to on a radio. If not exactly good music, it if it wasn't exactly good music, it was still realistic and normal for the time. Yeah. And the newscasters that were doing extra aliens invading New Jersey. They sounded like the same broadcasters that they were actually listening to in 1938. So yeah, it was like they trusted these voices coming across the radio to be ones that they would listen to for news.
Yeah.
And like nobody knows about aliens coming in all of a sudden. Like, come on. So like. And then that leads up into our next follow-up question, where were these people media illiterate, or did Mercury Theater broadcast play against them? I think it was like a little of both. Yeah. If we're going to be honest, because radio was still a new media. Like it was just being used for broadcasts, for civilian broadcasts around that time, like for around a decade at that point. Mm-hmm. Like this is like when before TV was even in black and white, it was that weird shade of blue. You remember that? It was like a Doctor Who episode about it. Yeah. Yeah.
So, did they warn the people at all during this broadcast?
Yes, they did actually, and that's the thing that makes me doubt the mass hysteria that was apparently going. Like a lot of people, the myth and the legend will tell you that there was no warning, that they just started doing this and scared a bunch of people, but that's not true. They warned you 3 times in the 58-minute broadcast, which arguably might not be long enough. They warn you once at the very beginning. And twice during the broadcast that this is a work of fiction, and it was a different voice too, like a straight up forward voice, like don't freak out, this is a work of fiction.
But if you tuned in after,
if you turned in after that or missed any of those 3 short segments in the middle of it, you might be inclined to panic. Yeah. So a few people did panic. Now there are reports of 911 calls at the time of people saying like, there's no aliens, like how do I help? Like people trying to donate blood, like I was talking about before, or take up arms. Like there were some people who said, how do I use my guns, my American guns, to help? Like y'all want to make fun of the Second Amendment until aliens are invading New Jersey, and now you need our help, right? Yeah. So, yeah, there were a few reports of that, but there were also a bunch of reports of people literally calling 911 to congratulate Mercury Studios for such an awesome broadcast. I don't know what.
Wait.
There were more reports of that than there were of people freaking out or, like, begging for help or whatever.
But would they have their own phone number? Why would you call 911?
Come on, you call Mercury, right? I don't know.
That's weird.
It is weird. Well, so then, like, what else? Oh, yeah. So the newspapers made it sound like there were people committing suicide and stuff, too. Yeah, it was really bad. Like, the newspapers were, like, really hitting the radio hard. Like, this is tabloid level of and this is coming from the New York Times. So, like, the New York Times put out some of this stuff. Like, this is one of the most credible news sources that people look to today.
Yeah.
And to think that they would make stuff up, like telling people that the news broadcast caused people to commit suicide, which, spoiler alert, not a single person committed suicide due to this broadcast. We have the records of the time to prove it. There's nobody. It was a hoax. Yes. The whole thing was a hoax.
Just a smear campaign.
It's funny because you could call this like a re-hoax. If you think about it, because if you consider the original broadcast to be a hoax, because it was presented as quote unquote truthful information, despite the warnings saying that you could argue that it wasn't enough. You could argue that it wasn't enough to convince literally everybody that it was a work of fiction. So if you consider that broadcast a hoax, then the result of the hoax was then re-hoaxed by the newspapers to be over-dramatized. And so, like, yeah, you can consider this to be one of the earliest cases of big media. You can call this one of the earliest cases of fake news.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought of something else, too. You could kind of think of this as Orson Welles being the first shock jockey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the first shock jockeys. Yeah. You could say that because that's what he did. He was on the radio and he shocked a bunch of people, apparently.
Yeah.
But despite not having a big mass panic effect, it was regarded as one of the best broadcasts, like fictional broadcasts of the time. Like, everybody loved it. Like, most people liked it, like, enjoyed it as a fiction.
Yeah.
Like, because it sounded so real, you know? Like, it's like, today, we still love that crap today. Like, Paranormal Activity.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like, the movie, it's like, or Blair Witch Project, you know, those fake documentaries.
Based on a real story.
No, the fake documentaries, like, they're presented like they're like found footage stuff, you know what I mean? Like, they're presented like it's all real, but it's obviously not, because, like, the Banshee probably didn't actually kill that guy or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, but we still love that stuff today, and this is one of the first examples of that. Yeah. So, did we get to all of our questions here? Yeah, so what was the broadcast about? How would you know about it before researching? What elements were familiar to listeners and caused panic?
Do you know how it ended, the story?
No. Do you?
I do.
Yeah, because we only listened. I only listened to the first 15 to 20 minutes of the broadcast to get the gist of it.
So the end of the alien invasion actually was pretty time period oriented too, because the aliens die, and they die from human pathogens, germs.
Oh,
and
crazy!
And this is coming right off of the Spanish flu.
I
feel like about it.
I think I've heard of. I don't remember. I think I watched a movie where that's what happened to the aliens.
Yeah, there is a War of the Worlds movie that's really
maybe
old.
That was it. Like, and like the people were wondering why they weren't coming out of their ship, and like finally approached it to find out that they were dead.
Yeah, that's the end of it. Yeah. I remember being scared of like old streetlights for a while, because that was like the laser beam that they used for the movie.
Oh, like the Daleks, so they were really just a plunger and a whisk, egg beater and a plunger.
Yeah, I was really little when I watched this, but they died of germs, and this is coming right after like the Spanish flu era in the 1920s. So it was kind of interesting that they ended it in that sort of.
Well, maybe the aliens should have been wearing their masks.
Maybe.
They wouldn't have got it, or no.
Maybe they should have been washing their hands.
Yeah, washing their hands, wearing their masks, and getting vaccinated. Maybe they wouldn't have died of the human flu, right?
Yeah. I think they even said, like, they test the aliens, it was, like, the common cold or something like that.
It was the common cold.
It was something very basic.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So does that speak low on the aliens or high on the humans who survive things that could just destroy alien races without, like,
I think
even thinking about it? We get a sniffle and a sneeze.
I think it speaks bounds about, like, probably, like, the human body being so, you know, like, evolutionary and resilient, and to think that there's life out there that could possibly never
wipe
been
out
sick
race,
before
right?
is just crazy.
Yeah.
But interesting.
Yeah, so that about covers everything. Thank you for joining us in this this audio only. I guess you can call this a podcast, huh?
Yeah, a mini cast.
It's like a mini cast because it's short. Yeah. It's sweet, and we got the topics. And look, I'm real sorry if I burst anybody's bubble about the mass hysteria caused by this show back in the 30s, but I hate to break it to you, it was a hoax. It was like a double hoax, like
hashtag fix it.
Yeah, like hoax squared, like hoax squared. Yeah. Well, I'm real sorry if I burst your bubble about that, but if anything, it does speak to the power of big media that they can do that they can convince us for decades that this was a big mass hysteria, only to find out in, 2014, I think, that it was a lie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But
decades later.
Yeah, so I'm not surprised that there's still people who think that it was a big like deal, because we only found out very recently. Yeah. All right. Well, that about does it for this episode. I suppose we'll be seeing y'all in the next one, right?
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye.